At Wolfschanze on November 25, 1941, the war room radiated controlled optimism. Heated air circulated through brass vents, while officers in pressed uniforms traced fingers across illuminated maps. Red arrows thrust deep into Soviet territory. Ukraine secured, Leningrad encircled, Moscow tantalizingly close. Each arrow represented divisions, regiments, the calculated momentum of German superiority. A colonel tapped the capital with his pointer. 30 kilometers. One final thrust. Christmas in heated barracks, then home. 35 kilometers north. Leutnant Klaus Steiner crouched in a trench scraped from frozen earth outside Krasnaya Poliana, staring at his left hand. The fingers had darkened from pink to purple over 3 days. He flexed them experimentally and felt nothing. No pain, no sensation. Just the visual confirmation of movement. An architect before the war, he'd sketched building elevations with these hands, drafted floor plans in precise ink lines. Now he couldn't hold a pencil steady for more than 10 seconds before tremors took over. The map said victory. His body said something else entirely. November yielded to December without ceremony. The mud that had swallowed trucks whole during autumn hardened into corrugated iron, ridges sharp enough to slice boot leather. Temperatures dropped 10 degrees overnight, then 10 more. The Wehrmacht had spent 6 months grinding through Soviet territory, trading blood for kilometers, each day bleeding the divisions weaker. But in Berlin's heated offices, optimism persisted like a fever dream. Moscow would fall. The Red Army was broken. One more push. Steiner commanded 2nd Platoon, Baker Company, 18th Panzer Infantry Division. On paper, 43 men. In reality, 37 still capable of holding a rifle. The others occupied stretchers in the medical tent or shallow graves marked by inverted rifles. He'd started with 48 in June. The mathematics of attrition required no calculation. The trend line pointed in one direction only. Obergefreiter Hans Weber sat beside him in the trench, methodically cleaning his rifle with a rag that had long ceased being useful. At 34, Weber carried the weathered patience of a man who taught Latin to disinterested teenagers in Munich before the war. Poland and France had tempered him into something harder, but fragments of the pedagogue remained. He'd quote Virgil during artillery barrages, recite Horace while digging latrines. The classical education persisted like muscle memory. Weber's voice emerged low, meant for Steiner alone. The men are asking questions. About what? About winter coats. About how much longer. About when we rotate back for rest. Steiner flexed his purple fingers again. Tell them command knows what it's doing? Do you believe that? The question hung between them, visible as breath vapor in the frigid air. Steiner had been raised to believe in hierarchy, in the chain of command, in German organizational superiority. 6 months of Russian immensity had introduced doubts he couldn't voice to anyone but Weber. I believe we follow orders. That's not an answer. It's the only answer we have. Gefreiter Friedrich Becker worked his radio set 20 meters down the trench line, young face compressed with concentration. At 19, Fritz embodied the optimism that Steiner and Weber had lost somewhere between the Bug River and here. He still wrote letters to his mother describing eventual victory, still believed the propaganda broadcast promising imminent triumph. His Bavarian accent carried clearly in the cold air as he confirmed message receipt, signal strength, routine protocols that maintained the illusion of control. The company commander called officers to his bunker that evening, a hole in the ground covered by logs and frozen tarps. Captain Dietrich looked like he'd aged a decade in 6 months, skin stretched tight over protruding cheekbones, eyes receding into dark hollows. He spread a map across the ammunition crate serving as table. Gentlemen, orders from division. We attack December 3rd. Objective is the rail junction at Lobnya. Intelligence indicates minimal Soviet presence. Once secured, we establish defensive positions and await the final assault on Moscow. The officers studied the map in silence. Steiner traced the attack route with his eyes. 12 kilometers through open country, no cover, temperatures forecast at -20. How's supply looking, sir? Dietrich's pause contained multitudes. Winter uniforms are in transit. Expected arrival before the attack. Expected, Steiner noted. Not confirmed. He kept his face neutral. The men cheered weakly when Dietrich announced the offensive at morning formation. Moscow, Christmas, home. The words had lost meaning through repetition, but hope remained a stubborn infection, resistant to reality's antibiotic. Fritz grinned and elbowed the man beside him. "See, I told you we'd finish this." That night, Steiner attempted writing to Anna, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. The pencil skittered across paper, forming illegible scratches rather than words. He gave up after 3 attempts, stuffed the letter in his coat pocket. What would he tell her anyway? That their daughter Greta, now 4 years old, would grow up without ever meeting him. That the war sold as a summer campaign had metastasized into something monstrous. That he could no longer feel his extremities. Weber found him an hour before dawn on December 2nd, sitting alone at the trench parapet. The older man carried 2 cups of ersatz coffee, hot water darkened with burnt grain, no actual coffee in months. Can't sleep. Haven't slept properly since Kiev. They sat in companionable silence, breath pluming white, stars wheeled overhead with indifferent brilliance. Somewhere in the distance, Soviet artillery rumbled like approaching thunder. Weber's voice emerged quiet. Forsan et haik olim, memenis uvabit. Translation. Perhaps one day it will be pleasing to remember even these things. Aeneid, Book 1. You think we'll remember this pleasingly? Weber studied the dark horizon. I think we'll remember surviving it. That has to count for something. The temperature plummeted that night. Steiner woke at 400 to commotion in the trench. Men shouting, someone screaming. He grabbed his coat and stumbled toward the noise. Weber close behind. Fritz sat upright at his radio position, frost crusted thick on his eyebrows and collar. His hands remained wrapped around the headset, frozen there. His eyes stared forward, unseeing, a thin rime of ice coating the corneas. His mouth hung slightly open as if caught mid-sentence. Dr. Johann Hartmann arrived within minutes, medical bag clutched in hands missing the tips of 3 fingers. At 42, Hartmann had practiced surgery at Berlin University Hospital before the war, performed delicate operations that required millimeter precision. Now he functioned as butcher and undertaker in equal measure. He checked for pulse, breath, any sign of life. Found none. How long? Based on body temperature and ice formation, at least 3 hours. Hartmann's voice carried the flat affect of a man who'd pronounced too many deaths. He fell asleep on watch. Hypothermia claimed him before he woke. Steiner knelt beside the body. Fritz still wore his summer weight uniform, same as everyone. The promised winter coats existed somewhere in the supply chain, theoretical as victory. He reached out and gently closed the frozen eyelids. The skin felt like waxed canvas. Weber stood behind them, face carved from stone. Want me to inform the men? Not yet. Let them sleep another hour. They wrapped Fritz in a shelter, half since the ground was too frozen for burial. 8 men would carry him to the rear area later, where he'd join hundreds of others awaiting spring thaw and mass graves. Steiner found the unfinished letter in Fritz's coat pocket, addressed to his mother in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. The last line read, "Tomorrow we attack Moscow. Finally this will end and I can come home." He tucked the letter back. The mother would receive a printed form in 3 weeks. Died for Führer and fatherland. The form wouldn't mention sleeping to death in a frozen trench. Wouldn't mention that her son's last conscious thought was probably about Christmas dinner. December 3rd arrived with brutal clarity. No clouds softened the sky's hard blue dome. Temperature registered -32 Celsius on Hartmann's thermometer. The men assembled for attack in thin uniforms, rifles clutched in hands wrapped with rags. Steiner watched them shiver in formation and thought of the maps in Berlin, the confident arrows, the heated rooms where old men planned operations they'd never execute. The attack commenced at 0700. Advancing through chest-deep snow immediately shattered the timetable. Men floundered forward at half speed, breaking trail with their bodies. Within an hour, 3 collapsed from exhaustion. Within 2 hours, Soviet resistance materialized, not the minimal presence intelligence had promised, but entrenched positions with interlocking fields of fire. That's when the weapons failed. Weber squeezed his MG-42's trigger, and the gun coughed 3 rounds before jamming solid. The lubricating oil had frozen to paste. Mechanisms locked mid-cycle. He screamed in frustration and tried the bolt. Wouldn't move. Desperate, he fumbled with his fly and urinated on the frozen bolt assembly, the steaming liquid melting ice momentarily. The gun fired another burst before seizing again. All along the line, rifles malfunction. Men worked bolts frantically, fingers tearing skin against frozen metal. Steiner's Kar 98K fired once, twice, then the bolt froze open. He hammered it with his palm. Nothing. Drew his Walther P-38 pistol, managed one shot before the slide locked frozen. Soviet troops materialized from the white landscape like apparitions. They wore thick padded coats, felt boots, fur-lined hats. They moved on skis, gliding effortlessly across snow that crippled German movement. Their PPSH submachine guns chattered without pause. Designed for Siberian winters, they functioned flawlessly in conditions that reduced German weapons to elaborate clubs. The battle devolved into something primordial. Weber abandoned his useless MG-42 and seized his entrenching tool, the folding shovel sharpened on both edges. A Soviet soldier lunged at him with a bayonet. Weber sidestepped and brought the shovel down in a vicious arc. The blade split the man's collarbone, lodged deep. Blood sprayed across white snow in garish contrast. Weber wrenched the shovel free and swung again, catching another Soviet across the throat. Steiner found himself grappling with a Russian private. Both men's rifles discarded as useless. They rolled in the snow, punching, clawing, biting. The Russian's youth surprised him. Couldn't be more than 17, smooth-cheeked beneath the grime. They fought with the desperate fury of drowning men. Steiner's hand found a rock beneath the snow. He brought it up and smashed it into the boy's temple once, twice, 3 times. Skull bone gave way with a wet crunch. Blood and brain matter painted the rock. The boy's eyes stayed open, staring at nothing. Steiner staggered to his feet, chest heaving, hands shaking. The rock fell from his grip. He stared at his palms, now crimson with another human's insides, and felt something fundamental crack inside his carefully constructed worldview. The battle lasted 90 minutes. When it ended, 23 Germans lay dead in the snow. 17 more carried wounds. 8 Soviets remained as frozen testimony to desperation's ferocity. The rail junction at Lobnya remained firmly Soviet. The attack achieved exactly nothing except adding names to casualty lists. Dr. Hartmann worked through the afternoon in conditions that mocked medical science. His field hospital consisted of a tent heated by a single kerosene stove. Wounded men crowded inside, breath-forming clouds, blood freezing before it could properly flow. Hartmann had 4 ampules of morphine for 17 wounded. He prioritized ruthlessly. Those likely to survive got the painkiller. The others received a slug of vodka confiscated from a dead Soviet. The worst cases involved frostbite. 4 men presented with hands frozen solid during the attack. Hartmann examined them with clinical detachment born of necessity. The flesh had crystallized, ice forming between cells, rupturing tissue from within, dark purple fading to black, the smell of necrosis already emerging. The field surgery occurred without anesthetic, morphine reserved for more salvageable cases. 2 men held each patient down while Hartmann worked with bone saw and scalpel heated over the stove. The screaming echoed across the position for hours. Men in distant trenches covered their ears and tried not to imagine themselves on that table. Hartmann amputated 4 hands that afternoon. Cut through frozen tissue, severed tendons, disarticulated joints. Stumps were cauterized with heated bayonets since proper surgical supplies had run out weeks ago. The acrid smell of burnt human flesh mingled with gangrene's sweet rot. He worked mechanically, mind retreating to clinical distance as survival mechanism. By evening, the count stood clear. 2nd Platoon had entered the day with 37 effective soldiers. Now 29 remained capable of fighting. Company strength had dropped from 147 to 107 in a single morning. The division's attack had failed across the entire front. That night, Weber discovered something while stripping Soviet corpses for winter gear. Standard practice now, the living cannibalized the dead without shame or ceremony. Survival trumped dignity. He found a diary in a young Russian's tunic pocket, leather-bound, edges worn soft. Weber read Russian passably, legacy of pre-war academic studies. He brought it to Steiner, face grim. "You need to see this." The diary entries spanned November into early December. The Soviet soldier, name illegible from water damage, had written detailed observations. November 28th, Germans still wear summer uniforms. Their weapons fail in the cold. They are starving. December 1st, received orders to prepare for counteroffensive. Command says Germans are at breaking point. General Winter fights for us now. We only need to survive and push. Steiner read the passages twice. Weber watched him process the implications. They knew. They were waiting for this. Winter is their weapon. They've been preparing. We haven't. The rational part of Steiner's mind, the architect who'd calculated stress loads and designed foundations, recognized the terrible logic. The Soviet Union traded space for time, absorbed the German advance, waited for the one ally that never lost a Russian winter. While Berlin confidently predicted victory, Moscow planned for the cold to do the killing. "Then we've already lost." Weber didn't contradict him. They sat in silence as temperature dropped toward -35. Around them, men huddled in inadequate coats, burning furniture scavenged from destroyed villages, eating frozen bread hard enough to break teeth. The maps in Berlin still showed arrows. The trenches showed only entropy. December 8th brought the supply train, first in 11 days. Men cheered weakly when word spread. Rations, ammunition, hopefully those winter coats. They formed up at the railhead 3 kilometers behind the line, breath pluming white, faces alight with desperate hope. The wagons opened to reveal Berlin's contempt dressed as logistics. 400 boxes of typewriter ribbons and carbon paper. 200 bottles of French champagne, frozen solid. Glass exploded into glittering shards. 50 crates of tropical uniforms meant for North Africa, somehow misrouted to the frozen hell of Russia. 12 boxes of 88mm shells for guns they didn't possess. 3 winter coats for 107 men. The silence lasted 5 seconds before erupting into chaos. Men surged forward, grabbed at the coats. Someone threw a punch. Another man drew his bayonet. Years of discipline and training dissolved into animal desperation. Steiner fired his pistol into the air. The sharp crack froze everyone mid-motion. Weber moved to flank him, hand on his holstered weapon. "Step back. All of you. Now." The men retreated slowly, eyes still fixed on those 3 precious coats. Steiner saw himself reflected in their faces, hollow-cheeked, desperate, reduced to base survival instinct. He made a decision. These coats go to Corporal Lang. Worst frostbite, both feet black. Private Schaefer, oldest man here at 47, and Private Muller, 6 children at home. But Herr Leutnant, no debate, no discussion. Those are the priorities. Weber materialized beside him, voice pitched low. "The others won't accept this. We're going to have a mutiny. Then we shoot the mutineers." Steiner's words emerged harder than intended. "But discipline stands, or we're just a mob waiting to freeze." The distribution proceeded without further incident, but something had fractured. Men looked at Steiner differently now, not with respect earned through competence, but with the wary calculation of animals watching another animal control scarce resources. He'd become gatekeeper to survival, and the role poisoned every interaction. Weber found him later, standing apart from the company. "We should strip Soviet corpses for coats. That's grave robbery. We're already robbing the living. What's a few dead Russians matter?" Steiner wanted to object on principle but couldn't formulate the argument. Weber was right. Morality became a luxury afforded only to the fed and warm. He gave permission with a nod. By morning, 2/3 of the company wore pieces of Soviet uniform, mismatched coats, oversized hats, boots taken from frozen feet. They looked less like Wehrmacht soldiers and more like some grotesque hybrid. German discipline crossbred with Russian survival pragmatism. Steiner documented the transformation in his diary. "We have become grave robbers. God forgive us." I wonder if he's still paying attention this far east. December 10th marked the day rations dropped from 1,500 to 1,000 calories. The field kitchen still functioned, barely, serving watery soup with occasional chunks of mystery meat. Steiner suspected the meat came from sources better left unexamined. The body needed 5,000 calories daily to maintain temperature at -35. The deficit meant slow starvation, body consuming itself to generate heat. The horses went first. The company's last 8 animals were slaughtered methodically. Each horse represented 3 days of meat for the entire unit. Steiner gave the order personally for Blucher, an aging mare who'd pulled supply wagons since Poland. She nuzzled his hand as he raised the pistol. Trusting to the last, he shot her between the eyes and walked away before the body hit the ground. The men butchered the carcasses with mechanical efficiency, steaks, organs, even bones for soup stock. Nothing wasted. They cooked the meat over open fires and ate in silent gratitude. Several men wept while chewing. Steiner couldn't tell if the tears came from relief or shame. By December 15th, the company had consumed all 8 horses. Hunger settled in like a patient predator. Men started obsessing about food, conversations circling endlessly around remembered meals. Steiner caught himself fantasizing about his mother's sauerbraten, the rich gravy over tender beef, bread dumplings soaking up flavor. The fantasy hurt worse than the hunger. Weber began boiling his leather belt in a pot scavenged from a destroyed village. 6 hours of simmering rendered it into glutinous paste that contained theoretical calories. Others followed suit. Belts, straps, saddles, pistol holsters, anything leather became food. The paste had no taste but filled stomachs temporarily, staving off the gnawing emptiness that made sleep impossible. Dr. Hartmann found Private Schneider chewing candle wax. The young soldier had packed half a candle into his mouth, working his jaw mechanically, swallowing indigestible paraffin. Hartmann tried to stop him, but Schneider shoved him away, eyes wild. 3 days later, Schneider died from intestinal blockage. His autopsy, performed in the open air since the medical tent was too cold, revealed a solid mass of undigested wax, occluding his bowels. Hartmann documented it clinically. Death by desperation. Scurvy announced itself in the 3rd week. Old wounds reopened as connective tissue dissolved. Men's gums bled constantly, staining teeth pink. Private Weber lost 2 molars while eating frozen bread. He spat them into his palm, studied them curiously, then pocketed them as souvenirs. On December 14th, the miracle occurred. A single Junkers U-52 transport fought through snowstorm and Soviet fighters to drop supply bags. Most fell in Soviet-held territory, but one landed 30 meters from the German lines. Men scrambled toward it under fire, dragging the heavy canvas bag back to cover. Inside, 200 loaves of black bread, 50 cans of meat, 100 chocolate bars. Weber organized distribution with mathematical precision. Each man received exactly 1/10 of a loaf, half a can of meat, 1 chocolate bar. No exceptions, no special treatment. They sat in the frozen trench and ate slowly, savoring every bite. For 20 minutes, conversation ceased. Only the sounds of chewing, of men remembering what satisfaction felt like. Steiner bit into his chocolate and closed his eyes. The sweetness exploded across starved taste buds. For one perfect moment, he existed in pure sensation. No cold, no fear, no responsibility. Just this: food, warmth generated from within, the small pleasure of a full mouth. Weber recited softly, almost to himself, Forsan et haish oli meminise juvabit. Steiner swallowed, opened his eyes. Translation: perhaps one day it will be pleasing to remember even these things. You think we'll remember this? Weber considered the question seriously. I think we'll remember that in the worst moment, we shared fairly. That counts for something. Soviet artillery opened fire before the meal finished. Katyusha rockets screamed overhead, the distinctive howl that Germans had learned to dread. Explosions walked across the position in sequential thunder. Men dove for cover, precious bread clutched against chests. The moment shattered like frozen glass. News filtered down through fragmentary radio reports. December 6th, while 2nd Platoon fought for a meaningless rail junction, the Red Army launched massive counteroffensive across 600 kilometers of front. December 7th, multiple German positions reported Soviet attacks. December 9th, entire sectors collapsed. Weber listened to intercepted Russian broadcasts, face paling as he translated. They're not just attacking locally, They're advancing everywhere. Coordinated offensive across the entire Moscow front. How coordinated? Multiple armies, armor, cavalry, ski troops. This isn't opportunistic. They've been planning this. The implications cascaded through Steiner's strategic understanding. Everything command had promised. One more push, Moscow by Christmas, victory before New Year, all lies built on willful blindness. The Soviet Union hadn't been defeated in June. It had been retreating strategically, trading land for time, waiting for winter to arrive in German logistics to collapse. He made a decision. We need to withdraw, establish shorter defensive line, preserve what's left of the unit. Weber studied him carefully. That's retreat. The Führer's orders say, I know what the orders say. I'm telling you what reality says. Reality and orders haven't aligned since Kiev, Herr Leutnant. That hasn't changed anything. Steiner drafted the withdrawal recommendation anyway. Routed it through proper channels to Captain Dietrich to battalion to regiment. He outlined the tactical logic. Current positions untenable, unit strength below combat effectiveness, supply lines severed, Soviet numerical superiority overwhelming. Requesting permission to execute fighting withdrawal to defensible terrain 40 kilometers west. The response arrived December 16th via radio. Steiner read it 3 times, hoping the words would somehow change. Führer order, no retreat, every position held to last man. Officers requesting withdrawal court-martialed, Heil Hitler. He read it aloud to Weber and the other section leaders. Silence greeted the pronouncement. Then Weber spoke, voice carefully neutral. That's insane. We're already surrounded on 3 sides. Those are the orders. Those orders will kill us all. I know. The group dispersed slowly, men absorbing the implications. Steiner sat alone in the command bunker, a hole barely deep enough to stand upright, walls frozen earth, roof logs covered by tarps. He studied the tactical map showing their position. Soviet forces marked in red occupied 3 sides. The 4th side remained nominally open, but under constant pressure. Simple mathematics indicated their pocket would close within days. He had perhaps 50 effective soldiers. Soviet intelligence estimated 300 enemy in immediate area, with reinforcements available. Ammunition for 2 days of heavy fighting. Food for 3 days at starvation rations. Medical supplies exhausted. Winter coats for 1/3 of the unit. And orders to hold to the last man. The impossible choice crystallized. Obey and die, or disobey and face execution for cowardice. The third option, surrender, didn't exist. Soviet treatment of German prisoners ranged from forced labor to immediate execution. The Commissar order had poisoned any hope of honorable surrender. Steiner thought about Anna and Greta in Dresden. Safe, warm, unaware, their husband and father sat in a frozen hole debating the least terrible way to die. He thought about the men under his command, young faces aged by horror, trusting him to lead them through impossible circumstances. He thought about the rock in his hand, smashing through a Russian boy's skull, and wondered when exactly he'd become the kind of man who killed children in the snow. He chose to obey, not from loyalty to Hitler, that had died somewhere between the Bug River and here, but from inability to imagine the alternative. If he retreated without orders, the Feld Gendarmerie would shoot him. Then they'd shoot Weber for following his orders. Then the next officer would face the same impossible choice. Someone had to stand and die so the system could maintain its delusion of control. Better me than forcing the decision onto another. December 18th arrived with temperatures plunging to -38. Soviet forces launched their assault at 200, exploiting darkness and cold that turned German defensive positions into frozen tombs. The attack began silently. Soviet scouts infiltrated the wire, cut through with insulated shears that didn't betray presence. They moved through German positions like ghosts, throats cut, sentries collapsing without sound. Weber discovered the infiltration when he found Corporal Lang sitting in his fighting position, head tilted back at an unnatural angle, dark wound gaping beneath his jaw. He sounded the alarm manually. Bell seized from destroyed church, rung frantically. The men scrambled from inadequate sleep into nightmare chaos. Soviet troops poured through breached perimeter, PPSH submachine guns chattering, grenades thrown into bunkers. Fighting devolved instantly into close-quarter savagery. Steiner found himself in a storage bunker with 3 Soviet soldiers, all rifles useless at arm's length. He killed the first with his entrenching tool, the sharpened blade catching the man across the face, splitting cheekbone like rotten fruit. The second he grappled hand to hand, thumb seeking the man's eyes. The third came at him with a knife. Steiner blocked with his forearm, felt the blade slice through coat and muscle. Punched the Soviet's throat with his free hand. Cartilage collapsed inward. The man dropped, drowning in his own crushed windpipe. Blood poured from Steiner's arm. He wrapped it crudely with a torn sleeve and stumbled back into the fighting. The village became labyrinth of death. Houses changed hands multiple times, each room purchased with blood. One building, a 2-story wooden structure that had housed Soviet Collective Farm Administration, saw particularly vicious combat. Germans held the ground floor. Soviets occupied the second. Grenades rolled up and down the stairs. Wounded men crawled towards safety that didn't exist. Weber led a squad into the building's basement to outflank Soviet positions. Total darkness below, broken only by muzzle flashes. They fought blind, shooting at sounds, stabbing at shadows. Weber strangled a Soviet soldier with bare hands, felt the man's pulse hammer against his fingers, then slow and stop. When he released the corpse, he vomited violently. The contents of his empty stomach, bile and nothing, splattered across frozen earth floor. Dr. Hartmann defended the field hospital with surgical saw when Soviet troops broke through. The improvised weapon, designed to cut bone, proved brutally effective against flesh. He killed 2 men before reinforcements arrived, then collapsed shaking against the medical supplies he'd protected. Blood soaked his white coat, none of it his own. The battle lasted until dawn. When light finally broke across the devastated village, the butcher's bill became visible. 37 Germans dead, 14 seriously wounded. Company strength now stood at 56 from 147 3 weeks prior. Soviet casualties numbered higher. They'd attacked into prepared positions despite tactical disadvantage, but possessed resources to absorb losses. The Germans did not. Steiner sat on the steps of the command bunker, hands trembling uncontrollably, not from cold, from adrenaline crash and accumulated trauma. He couldn't make them stop shaking, couldn't make his mind stop replaying the moment his thumbs sank into human eyes, the sensation of jelly giving way to hard bone beneath. Dr. Hartmann approached, sat beside him without speaking. His hands shook too. After long silence, he spoke. "Klaus, I performed 18 amputations today. Frostbite, gangrene, shrapnel wounds. I'm out of anesthetic. I've been cutting off frozen limbs while men scream. This isn't war. I don't have a word for what this is." Steiner had no answer. Language had become inadequate somewhere along the road from Smolensk. December 19th brought brief respite. Soviet forces withdrew to regroup. German survivors dug in deeper, fortified positions, waited for the next assault. Steiner found Weber sitting alone, staring at nothing. The older man didn't acknowledge his presence for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice emerged flat. "I've been thinking about Virgil, Book 2 of the Aeneid, the fall of Troy, Urbs Antiqua Ruit, the ancient city falls. That's us. We're Troy. We're not dead yet. No, but we're already ruins." In the distance, aircraft engines droned. Soviet Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmoviks appeared on the horizon, ugly functional shapes built for ground attack. They carried bombs, rockets, cannons designed to shred infantry in open positions. The men scattered toward whatever cover existed. Steiner grabbed Weber's arm. "Move! Now!" Weber rose slowly, movements mechanical. "The soul has left the building, Herr Leutnant. Body's just following orders now." The radio crackled that evening. Order transmitted from division. Hold position. No retreat. Reinforcements coming. Steiner looked at his 56 remaining men. Half suffered frostbite. Quarter showed signs of gangrene. All were starving, uniforms hanging loose on skeletal frames. Reinforcements existed only in Berlin's optimistic projections. Same place that held the winter coats and adequate rations and eventual victory. He gathered the men, all who could stand. No speeches, no propaganda. Just honesty. The order is to hold. We will obey. But I want you to know, I'm proud to have served with you. Every single one, Weber added quietly, voice carrying to the assembled soldiers. In omnia paratus, ready for anything. The men didn't cheer. They nodded acceptance, understanding that pride and readiness couldn't stop bullets or thaw frozen limbs. But something passed between them, acknowledgement that they'd faced death together, that the bonds formed in this frozen hell mattered more than victory or defeat. Steiner looked toward the horizon. Soviet forces gathered for the next assault, dark masses visible against snow. Temperature forecast predicted -45 tonight. The promised reinforcements wouldn't arrive. The winter coats wouldn't materialize. Moscow wouldn't fall. But they would hold this meaningless village because the alternative was unthinkable, and orders remained orders even when orders became death sentences. The illusion was over. The maps in Berlin still showed confident arrows pointing toward victory. The trenches showed only the slow mathematics of annihilation. Now came the dying. December 21st dawned without ceremony. Steiner woke to shouting at the east end of the trench line and knew immediately something had gone wrong during the night. He pulled himself from the shallow depression that served as quarters, joints protesting, and moved toward the commotion. 3 men sat in their fighting positions exactly as they'd been posted. Private Holzer stared forward over the parapet, rifle across his lap, eyes open. Private Graf leaned against the frozen earthen wall, hands folded in his lap. Corporal Neumann had slumped sideways, chin resting on his chest. All 3 wore the same expression, peaceful, almost serene, mouths curved in faint smiles. All 3 were dead. Hartmann confirmed what everyone already knew. Hypothermia. Final stage causes euphoria, sensation of warmth. They removed their helmets before dying. Standard symptom. Probably felt comfortable for the first time in weeks. Weber stood apart, studying the bodies with clinical detachment. They're the lucky ones. They stopped feeling. The observation contained no malice, just exhaustion's brutal honesty. Steiner couldn't formulate an objection. The 3 dead men looked more peaceful than anyone still breathing. Captain Dietrich arrived at midday with unexpected company. A gaunt officer Steiner didn't recognize stepped from the communication trench, face carved into angles by starvation and strain. The stranger's eyes held the particular vacancy of someone who'd witnessed the complete collapse of order. Hauptmann Otto Reinhardt. Battalion sent me with what remains of 4th Company. What remains numbered 18 men in various stages of disintegration. They shuffled into the position carrying personal weapons and nothing else. No heavy equipment, no supplies, just bodies that still moved. Reinhardt himself looked like an anatomy lesson. Skin shrink-wrapped over protruding bones, uniform hanging loose enough to suggest he'd lost 15 kilos. Dietrich gestured toward the assembled remnants. Combined strength, 74 men. 4th and 2nd Companies will merge under Hauptmann Reinhardt's command. Leutnant Steiner, you're his second. Understood. Reinhardt's first order came clipped and military precise. Officers to the command bunker. 5 minutes. They gathered in the cramped space. Reinhardt, Steiner, Weber, Hartmann, 2 surviving section leaders from 4th Company. Reinhardt spread the tactical map across the ammunition crate that served as furniture. Situation assessment. Current position is Mikhailovka village. Soviet forces on 3 sides. 4th side under pressure. Ammunition for 48 hours, heavy fighting. Food for 72 hours at current rations. Medical supplies exhausted. He paused, eyes moving from face to face. Anyone disagree with that analysis? Silence confirmed the assessment. Then we need a realistic supply timeline. Doctor, you have the medical perspective. Hartmann pulled a small notebook from his coat, pages filled with cramped handwriting. I've been tracking consumption versus requirements. Current ration is 400 calories per man per day. The human body burns 5,000 calories daily at -40 to maintain core temperature. Deficit of 4,600 calories per man. The mathematics. Each man is losing 500 grams of body weight daily. Most have already lost 15 to 20 kilos since October. Multiple organ failure begins at 4 weeks of sustained deficit. Mass death at 5 weeks. Reinhardt absorbed this without visible reaction. Time to organ failure. 3 weeks, plus or minus 5 days depending on individual reserves. When did the starvation timeline begin? December 1st by my calculation. That gives us until approximately December 22nd for mass casualties. Reinhardt checked his watch. Tomorrow. Hartman nodded. The wounded will go first. They can't generate heat efficiently. Then the sick. Then anyone with pre-existing conditions. The healthy might last another week. What about resupply? Steiner answered before Hartman could. There is no resupply. The trains aren't coming. The statement hung in frozen air. Weber elaborated, voice flat. Supply train departed Warsaw December 10th. Winter uniforms, rations, medical supplies, ammunition. Tracked its progress via radio intercepts. Made it to Vyazma December 17th. Partisans hit the rail yard. 3 wagons destroyed, locomotive damaged. Still sitting there. How far is Vyazma? 300 kilometers. Truck convoy tried to reach us December 19th. Made it 40 kilometers before getting stuck in snow. Couldn't extract the vehicles. Drivers walked back. Reinhardt studied the map with the focus of someone calculating impossible mathematics. So we're surrounded, outnumbered, starving, freezing, and completely cut off. That's the situation. Anyone have good news to balance this? Weber's response came deadpan. It's not snowing right now. The gallows humor broke tension momentarily. Reinhardt almost smiled. Then his face settled back into professional mask. Dismissed. Steiner, stay. The others filed out. Reinhardt waited until the bunker emptied before speaking. You wrote the withdrawal request. Yes, the one that got labeled insubordination. I outlined tactical reality. You requested permission to retreat. In the current command climate, that's career suicide. My career seems less relevant than the men's survival. Reinhardt studied him carefully. I commanded 200 men 3 weeks ago. Lost the entire company in a fighting retreat near Klin. I was ordered to hold a bridge. I held it for 6 hours. Then Soviet armor appeared and I ordered withdrawal. Saved 40 men. Was relieved of command for cowardice. He pulled out a silver cigarette case, offered one to Steiner. Both lit up. First tobacco in days. Rough Soviet makorka scavenged from corpses. These 18 men are what remains after my relief. Berlin sent me here as punishment posting. Command someone else's leftovers. Die quietly without embarrassing the system. Why are you telling me this? Reinhardt exhaled smoke slowly. Because you're thinking the same thing I thought at Klin. That saving men matters more than following insane orders. I want you to understand what happens when you follow that instinct. They don't court-martial you. They just assign you to die somewhere else. The implications settled heavy. Obedience or disobedience led to identical destinations. The only variable was how many men you took with you. So we follow orders. We follow orders. But we do it intelligently. Find every loophole, every ambiguity, every technicality that lets us preserve men within the bounds of acceptable interpretation. That's a narrow window. It's the only window we have. That night, Steiner discovered Reinhardt's habit. The Hauptmann sat alone in a corner of the command bunker, writing by candlelight. Not reports or tactical assessments, personal letters. Steiner watched without announcing his presence, saw Reinhardt's pen move across paper in careful script, saw him pause to wipe his eyes before continuing. The content became clear when Reinhardt didn't notice Steiner's approach. Your son Klaus died instantly during the attack on Moscow. He felt no pain. He spoke of you often in his final days. Remembered the way you taught him to fish at Tegernsee. He was brave to the last. You should be proud. With deepest sympathy, Hauptmann Otto Reinhardt. Steiner cleared his throat softly. Reinhardt stiffened, closed the letter quickly. Report, Leutnant. Sir, I didn't mean to intrude. The letters are none of your concern. They are if you're writing to families of your former company. Reinhardt's mask cracked microscopically. Someone should tell them how their sons died. The official forms just say, fell for Führer and fatherland. That's not enough. You're writing 200 letters, 187 so far, 13 more to go. Steiner processed this slowly. Sir, those letters will never be sent. We're cut off, I know. Then why? Reinhardt's voice emerged quiet, almost vulnerable. because someone should remember their names, because their families deserve to know their sons were brave, that they mattered, that their deaths weren't just statistics. Even if they never received these letters, even if I die here and the letters burn, at least someone took the time to write them. The shared understanding passed between them wordlessly. Both men had crossed into territory where traditional military hierarchy dissolved, replaced by something more fundamental, two humans trying to preserve meaning in circumstances designed to erase it. I'll help. Give me 20 names. Reinhardt hesitated, then passed over a roster. Thank you. They wrote until the candle guttered out, crafting lies about painless deaths and heroic sacrifices, knowing the lies mattered less than the attempt to honor the dead with words. Truth would serve no purpose. Comfort might. January 1st arrived with temperatures at -42. Someone, Weber suspected, had hidden a bottle of schnapps in the frozen supply column, discovered weeks earlier, saved it for this exact moment. He produced it at 2330, 30 minutes before midnight. The men gathered in the largest bunker, 74 survivors packed shoulder to shoulder for warmth and ceremony. Weber had calculated precisely 15 milliliters per man. He poured into whatever containers existed, tin cups, canteen caps, one man's upturned helmet. Reinhardt raised his portion to 1942. May it be better than 1941. Weber added his own benediction, ad meliora, toward better things. They drank in unison, harsh liquor burning throats unused to anything but snow water and ersatz coffee. For 30 minutes, conversation shifted away from hunger and cold and Soviet attacks. Men reminisced about peacetime, told stories worn smooth through repetition. Private Miller described his mother's Christmas stolen, the candied fruit and marzipan, the dusting of powdered sugar. His voice took on dreamy quality, as if speaking of something holy. Steiner found himself talking about Greta without conscious decision. She was born in May. Anna writes that she has my eyes, dark brown. She laughs when the cat purrs, apparently. Just this bubbling giggle that makes everyone smile. What's her name? Greta, after my grandmother. Pretty name. Weber contributed a memory of Munich beer gardens in summer, the way afternoon sun filtered through chestnut trees, the sound of children playing near the fountain in Viktualienmarkt. His voice wavered slightly. I used to sit there between classes, grade Latin exams, watch the world move past. Thought it would always be there waiting. It will be. We'll see it again. Hartmann spoke quietly from the corner. This is what we're fighting for. Not Hitler, not ideology. Each other. Home. The chance to sit in a beer garden again and remember when we couldn't. The moment crystallized into something fragile and precious. These starving, frozen, traumatized men smiled. Remembered humanity existed beyond this frozen hell. Held on to the fiction that home still existed and they might reach it. Soviet artillery shattered the illusion at year 015. Katyusha rockets screamed overhead, distinctive howl that preceded obliteration. The men scattered to fighting positions, precious moment evaporating like breath vapor. Steiner thought, even 1 hour of peace is too much to ask. By January 7th, the mental casualties began mounting. Private Paul Schneider started talking to his dead mother during the third week. He'd sit in his fighting position, conducting full conversations with empty air, responding to questions no one else heard. Weber reported it to Steiner with clinical detachment. He's arguing with her about his diet, insisting he's eating properly. Can he still function? He stands watch, maintains his weapon, follows orders. But he's not entirely here anymore. None of us are entirely here. Schneider's break accelerated over 48 hours. By January 8th, he was answering questions from multiple phantom interlocutors: mother, father, sister, the family dog. That evening, he walked towards Soviet lines during his watch, unarmed, calling out, Mutti, Mutti, I'm coming home now. Wait for me. Soviet machine gun fire cut him down 15 meters beyond the wire. His body lay there for 3 days, gradually disappearing under snow until only his hand remained visible, frozen in reaching gesture towards something no one else could see. Unteroffizier Franz Klein's suicide happened January 9th. Hartmann found him in the basement of a destroyed building, Walter P-38 on the ground beside his body. Most of his head decorated the frozen wall behind him. The suicide note was brief, written in careful script. I can't feel my feet. I can't feel my hands. Soon I won't feel anything. I choose when. Weber's crisis manifested more subtly. Steiner noticed first. The normally talkative sergeant had gone silent for 2 days straight, responded to questions in monosyllables, avoided eye contact. On January 10th, Steiner found him sitting alone in a recessed fighting position, staring at his hands. Hans, talk to me. Weber's response emerged distant. I killed 11 men in the basement, December 18th, hand to hand in the dark. I can still feel their throats collapsing under my fingers. I wash my hands every day with snow, but I can still feel them. You did what you had to. Did I? Or did I enjoy it? In that darkness, Klaus, when I couldn't see anything, when I was just pure survival instinct, what if I enjoyed killing them? What if the war ends and I can't stop? You're not a murderer. You're a soldier in impossible circumstances. What's the difference? Weber turned to face him directly, eyes hollow. I teach Latin to children in peacetime. Conjugate verbs, decline nouns, Parsi Cicero. Now I strangle men with my bare hands and wonder which version is real, the teacher or the killer. Both are real. Both are you. That's what terrifies me, that I could slide between them so easily, that the distance from pedagogue to predator is shorter than I thought. Steiner had no adequate response. The same question haunted him. The architect who'd calculated building loads now calculated the most efficient way to kill another human with improvised weapons. Which version would survive this war, assuming any version survived at all? Hartmann prescribed the only medicine available, his personal flask of brandy hoarded through months of deprivation. He pressed it into Weber's hands. Drink this, sleep. Tomorrow we need you functional. What if I don't wake up? Then you'll finally rest. Weber drank, grimaced at the burn, drank again. Within an hour he was unconscious. Not sleep exactly, but the body shut down when pushed past sustainable limits. Steiner and Hartmann sat watch over him, two men keeping vigil over a third who'd reached the breaking point they all approached. By January 11th, 15% of the remaining men showed signs of combat exhaustion severe enough to impair function. They stared at nothing, failed to respond to direct questions, wept without provocation. Hartmann documented each case with clinical precision, knowing the documentation served no purpose except bearing witness. No treatment existed. No evacuation was possible. They either recovered through sheer will or they broke completely. The discovery came that same evening. Steiner went looking for Reinhardt to discuss watch rotations and found him alone in the command bunker, surrounded by papers. The Hauptmann didn't notice Steiner's arrival, too focused on his writing. Your son Friedrich was killed during a Soviet counterattack. He died defending his comrades, buying time for others to reach his safety. He spoke often of your support, how you encouraged his interest in engineering. That gift you gave him, the drafting set, he carried it until the end. You raised a hero. Signed, Hauptmann Otto Reinhardt. Steiner watched silently as Reinhardt paused, rubbed his eyes with thumb and forefinger, then continued writing. The pile of completed letters had grown, must be 40 or 50 now, all addressed to families who'd never received them, all describing deaths that had occurred weeks ago in circumstances Reinhardt hadn't witnessed. The Hauptmann finally sensed presence and looked up. His face cycled through emotions, surprise, embarrassment, defiance, before settling on exhaustion. Go ahead. Say it. Say what? That I'm wasting time writing letters that will never be sent. That this is pointless. Is that what I should say? It's what everyone thinks. Steiner stepped fully into the bunker, picked up one of the finished letters, read it carefully. The prose was good, personal, specific, comforting. This is Friedrich Becker's mother. He was the radio operator in my platoon, died December 2nd from hypothermia. I know, I reviewed the casualty reports from all units before writing. You didn't know him. You weren't there. No. But someone should tell his mother he mattered, even if she never reads it. These letters will burn when we die here. You know that. Reinhardt met his eyes directly. I write them anyway, because the alternative is letting them disappear without acknowledgement. Because maintaining the fiction that their deaths meant something helps me function. Because when I write that Private Schmidt died bravely, I'm reminding myself that bravery still exists. Steiner understood completely. The letters served as Reinhardt's survival mechanism, same as Weber's Latin quotes or Hartmann's meticulous medical documentation or Steiner's own journal entries. They were all creating meaning in a situation designed to erase it, building structures of significance from materials as fragile as hope. These are good. The families would want these. They'll never receive them. I'll die here. The letters will disappear. Maybe, but you wrote them anyway. That counts. Does it? Steiner considered the question seriously. Yes, because the impulse to document, to remember, to insist that individual lives matter, that impulse is what separates us from the system that sent us here to die for nothing. Reinhardt's mask cracked further, revealing the raw grief beneath. I lost 200 men. I was their commander. I was supposed to bring them home. Instead, I watched them freeze, starve, bleed out in snow. Every morning I wake up and wonder which of them I could have saved if I'd made different decisions. You can't carry that. Someone has to. The families will never know their sons' names. Someone needs to remember. Then we'll remember together. Give me 20 names. They wrote side by side until Arrow 300, crafting careful lies about heroic sacrifices and painless endings, knowing the truth that most died badly, slowly, in agony, served no purpose except compounding grief. Sometimes the kindest thing was a well-constructed fiction. January 12th brought the renewed Soviet assault everyone had been expecting. It began at dawn with artillery preparation, shells landing in careful pattern to suppress German positions. Then came the infantry, advancing in waves, accepting casualties as cost of eventual victory. The first attack hit the eastern perimeter at 6:15. German defenders fired from prepared positions, magazines running dry quickly, falling back to conserve ammunition. By 0730, the Soviets controlled the village's eastern edge. By 0900, they'd pushed to the center. House to house fighting consumed the day. The same buildings changed hands multiple times, rooms purchased with blood and held until the next assault reversed ownership. Steiner led a counterattack to retake the former Collective Farm Administrative Building, 2 stories of log construction that commanded sight lines across half the village. They went in fast, grenades preceding movement, shooting anything that moved. Third floor belonged to Soviets who'd fortified the stairwell. Steiner's assault team got pinned halfway up, taking casualties, unable to advance or retreat. Weber appeared with a solution: Molotov cocktails fashioned from vodka bottles and gasoline siphoned from frozen vehicles. He hurled 3 up the stairwell in rapid succession. The narrow space channeled flames upward like a chimney. Soviet soldiers emerged screaming, clothes ablaze, and were cut down methodically. The smell of burnt flesh filled the building, overlaid with gunpowder and fear sweat. By sunset, the building remained in German hands, but it cost them 11 men, 8 dead, 3 wounded critically. Tactical value of one administrative building? Negligible. Cost of holding it? Irreplaceable. January 13th saw the pattern repeat. Soviet attacks, German defense, incremental advances purchased with disproportionate casualties on both sides. The line contracted slowly, village shrinking as defenders abandoned untenable positions. Weber personally killed 4 Soviet soldiers that day with his entrenching tool. Each death occurred at close range, the sharpened blade splitting skulls, severing arteries, doing damage no training manual described. After the 4th, he collapsed against a wall and wept. When Steiner found him, Weber's hands shook so badly he couldn't light a cigarette. I can't keep doing this. Klaus, I physically cannot keep killing people with a shovel. You don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. I choose to stop. Then we all die. Your section depends on you. They need you functional. What if I'm not functional? What if I'm just broken pieces held together by discipline and inertia? Then you're the same as everyone else. We're all broken pieces. The question is whether we break alone or together. Weber accepted the cigarette Steiner lit for him, inhaled deeply. Morituri te salutant. Those who are about to die salute you. We're not dead yet. Give it time. Hartmann's field hospital had relocated 3 times in 2 days, following the contracting defensive perimeter. By January 14th, he was operating in a church basement. Stone foundation, low ceiling, a single candle for light. The wounded arrived in steady flow, carried by men who could barely walk themselves. The surgery Hartman performed belonged to medieval rather than modern medicine. No anesthetic, no proper tools, no antiseptic beyond vodka. He amputated frost-bitten limbs with a bone saw heated over candle flame, sutured wounds with thread pulled from uniforms, cauterized vessels with bayonets glowing red hot. The screaming echoed through the church, rising through stone floor to the sanctuary above where soldiers tried to rest. They covered their ears and tried not to imagine themselves on that table. Each scream reminded them of proximity, separated from that agony by nothing except luck and time. Steiner found Hartman at midnight, sitting on the church steps, smoking methodically through the last cigarettes of his personal supply. The surgeon's hands trembled. Blood stained his coat from collar to hem. I performed 23 amputations today, 17 frostbite, 6 traumatic injury. 2 men died on the table from shock. 3 more will die tonight from infection. The math doesn't work, Klaus. I can't save them faster than this place kills them. You're doing what you can. What I can isn't enough. It hasn't been enough since October. I'm just extending their suffering, giving them 3 more days of frozen hell before they die anyway. Would they choose 3 days or none? Hartman considered this. Some would choose none. Some already have. He gestured toward the church. Klein wasn't the only suicide. 3 more in the last week. They just did it quietly where I wouldn't find them and feel obligated to save them. The mathematics of despair. Each man calculating individually whether continued existence justified its cost. Some concluded it didn't. The ones who kept fighting had merely delayed the calculation, not changed the variables. January 15th opened with the message everyone had stopped expecting. The radio, functioning sporadically, more prayer than technology, crackled to life at 05:30. Weber manned the set, copied the transmission with shaking hands, ran it to Reinhardt and Steiner immediately. All units. Strategic withdrawal authorized. New defensive line 50 kilometers west. Evacuation begins dawn. January 16th. Priority given to mobile units. Hold until relieved. Steiner read it 3 times, searching for the trap. Withdrawal authorized. After weeks of hold to the last man fanaticism, suddenly permission to retreat. The relief was tempered immediately by logistics. Sir, we can't move 50 kilometers. Reinhardt had already begun calculating. He spread the map, traced the route. Why not? We have 23 wounded, no vehicles, temperature is -42. Half the men can't walk properly. Frostbite, malnutrition, injuries. 50 kilometers through Soviet-held territory would take 3 days minimum. So we leave the wounded. The words emerged flat, professional, utterly unacceptable. Steiner's response came sharp. Absolutely not. Then we all die here. The Soviets will overrun this position within 24 hours. We stay. We're dead or captured. We leave with wounded. We're too slow. We die on the march. The only mathematics that works involves leaving the immobile. I won't abandon wounded men. That's sentiment talking. Think tactically. 20 healthy men survive versus 74 corpses. Which serves Germany better? Which serves our humanity better? Weber interrupted from the doorway, voice weak. He's right, Klaus. Leave us. Take the others. Both officers turned. Weber leaned against the frame, supporting himself with visible effort. His wounded shoulder had developed infection. Hartman had cleaned it twice, drained pus, applied primitive dressings. The sepsis spread regardless. You're not making this decision. Someone has to. Better us than you. He moved into the room, each step deliberate. 23 wounded can't march. We'll slow the unit to a crawl. Soviets will catch us. Everyone dies. We carry you. With what? We don't have stretchers. We don't have bearers. We barely have functioning legs. Hartman appeared behind Weber. I'm staying with the wounded. The rest of you go. Steiner's voice rose despite himself. I'm not leaving anyone. That's not negotiable. Then you're killing us all for pride, for principle. We don't abandon our own. That's the only thing separating us from what? The Soviets, the system that sent us here. We crossed that line months ago, Klaus. We're not noble anymore. We're just meat trying to survive. The argument hung suspended, unsolvable. Every option led to death. Leave the wounded and preserve some chance of survival for the healthy. Take the wounded and die together, slowly, in the snow. Stay and get overrun. The mathematics permitted no good solution. Reinhardt finally spoke, command voice cutting through. Leutnant Steiner, you will organize the mobile elements for March. We depart at 2100 hours. Night movement reduces Soviet air threat. All wounded capable of walking will walk. Those incapable will be carried in rotation. We abandon no one. Sir, that's an order. Execute it. The decision had been made. They would march together, slowly, probably die together, but maintain the fiction that loyalty mattered more than survival. Steiner recognized it as exactly that: fiction, comforting lie, denial of brutal mathematics. But he found himself grateful for the lie. The next hours passed in preparation. Men distributed ammunition, 8 rounds per rifle. That was all that remained. Food was divided equally, 1 day's ration for a 3-day march. Hartmann prepared the wounded for transport, bandaging, splinting, administering the last morphine to those who'd need to walk on damaged legs. Weber pulled Steiner aside as preparations continued. Klaus, I need you to promise me something, anything. If I don't make it, when I don't make it, tell them I quoted Virgil at the end. Something dignified. Not that I died screaming in the snow. You're going to make it. We both know better. The infection has spread to my chest. I can feel it. Maybe 3 days before sepsis takes me. Maybe less. Steiner wanted to object, but couldn't formulate the words. Weber's assessment was probably accurate. The wound looked worse every day. Red streaks spreading from the entry point. Skin hot to touch despite ambient temperature. One more thing. Your daughter, Greta. Promise you'll tell her we tried to be decent men, even when the world was indecent, that we didn't abandon each other. I promise. Good. Weber managed a weak smile. Then it's worth it. Whatever happens next, at least we stayed human. They clasped hands, gripped firm despite weakness. Words became inadequate. The bond formed in this frozen hell transcended language. Understanding that they'd witnessed each other at lowest ebb and still maintained respect, even affection. That counted for something, maybe everything. The unit assembled at 2100 hours. 74 men, or what remained of them. 35 could walk unassisted. 24 could walk with support. 15 required stretchers fashioned from shelter halves and broken doors. They formed up in the village center, breath pluming white in minus 43-degree air. Reinhardt addressed them briefly. No speeches, no propaganda, just facts. 50 kilometers, 3 days. We move at night, hide during day. Soviet forces between us and the line. Some of us won't make it, maybe none of us, but we go together. Steiner added his piece, voice carrying to the assembled soldiers. You've earned the right to survive. Every one of you. We've been through hell. We've stayed together. We'll finish together. The men didn't cheer. Too tired, too cold, too realistic. They nodded acceptance, adjusted packs, checked weapons one final time. Some glanced back at Mikhailovka, the village they'd defended for weeks, soon to be abandoned. Others stared forward at the dark horizon, the kilometers of frozen emptiness separating them from theoretical safety. Weber stood near Steiner, face pale but determined. Alea jacta est. The die is cast, Caesar at the Rubicon. Appropriate reference. Seemed fitting. We're crossing our own river, no going back now. The column moved out at 21:15, slow procession of damaged men carrying their wounded through snow that reached mid-thigh. They walked into darkness, temperature dropping with each hour. Behind them, Mikhailovka burned. Reinhardt had ordered demolitions to deny shelter to Soviet forces. The flames cast long shadows across snow, orange light dancing across white canvas. Steiner walked near the head of the column, setting pace, measuring distance. 50 kilometers, 60,000 meters. If they managed 1 kilometer per hour, In that assumed optimistic conditions, they needed 50 hours of marching. Figure 8 hours per night of darkness, 7 nights minimum, with food for 1 day, against Soviet patrols, in minus 45-degree temperatures. The mathematics suggested death, but mathematics had never accounted for human stubbornness, the peculiar defiance that emerged when no rational hope remained. They would march because the alternative was sitting still and freezing. They would carry each other because abandonment meant losing the last fragments of humanity. They would reach the line because believing in arrival was the only thing keeping legs moving, or they would die trying. Either way, the choice had been made. Weber stumbled at hour 3, caught himself, stumbled again. Steiner moved to support him, but Weber waved him off. Save your strength. You'll need it. We're in this together. Then shoulder me in another hour. Right now I can manage. By hour 5, Weber couldn't manage anymore. He collapsed in the snow, breathing labored, skin burning with fever despite the cold. Hartmann checked him quickly. Sepsis is accelerating. Temperature over 40 Celsius. He needs antibiotics we don't have. How long? Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Not much longer. They fashioned a stretcher, added Weber to the rotation of wounded being carried. He mumbled deliriously as they loaded him, fragments of Latin mixed with German. Para spera ad astra. Through hardships to the stars. Then something about Troy burning. Then silence except for labored breathing. The column pressed forward through the long night. Men collapsed and were carried. Others took their place as bearers until they collapsed. The mathematics of exhaustion continued its inexorable calculation. By dawn, they'd covered 8 kilometers, 16% of the journey. 42 kilometers remained. They found shelter in an abandoned collective farm, burned buildings, collapsed roofs, but enough standing walls to provide concealment from Soviet observation. The men collapsed into whatever spaces they could find, too exhausted to eat, too cold to sleep properly. They existed in suspended state between consciousness and shutdown. Steiner sat against a wall next to Weber's stretcher. The older man's breathing had become irregular, wet rattling that suggested lungs filling with fluid. His eyes opened periodically, focused without seeing, closed again. At noon, Weber rallied briefly. His eyes cleared, focused on Steiner. Klaus, it's time. Don't say that. Rest. We'll get you home. Weber managed a weak smile. Liar, but I appreciate the effort. He coughed, crimson spray speckling his lips. Tell me about Greta. One last time. What does Anna say about her? Steiner's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. She laughs at the cat. Has your sense of humor, apparently. Finds everything funny. Anna says she's fearless. Climbs on everything. Afraid of nothing. Good. The world needs fearless women. Going to need them to rebuild after we're done destroying everything. You'll meet her. When you get home, you'll... Hans Weber died at 13:47 hours on January 16, 1942. The sepsis had spread to his heart, shut down organs one by one. He went quietly in the end, breath simply stopping between one rattle and the next. His last word was Latin, barely audible. Requiescat. Let it rest. Hartmann closed his eyes, noted time of death in his medical log. Cause, septic shock from combat wounds, complicated by malnutrition, exhaustion, exposure. Real cause, Russia. They buried him in the snow that afternoon, no time for proper grave. Wrapped in his Soviet greatcoat, words from Virgil read over him by Steiner, who stumbled through the Latin pronunciation. Forsan et hic olim meminisse juvabit. Perhaps one day it will be pleasing to remember even these things. But Steiner doubted he'd ever remember this pleasingly. Would only remember Weber's hands strangling Soviet soldiers, his voice reciting classical poetry in frozen trenches, his final words about rest. Would remember failing to save him despite promises. Would carry that weight home, assuming home still existed and he reached it. They marched again at dusk, 73 men now. The column moved slower, burdened by grief compounded onto exhaustion and hunger. Ahead lay 40 kilometers, 2 more nights of frozen march. Soviet forces between them and safety. Behind lay Mikhailovka's smoking ruins and Weber's shallow grave, and every illusion that had survived this far. The war had taken everything: innocence, faith, hope, friends, What remained were damaged men moving through darkness because stopping meant death and moving meant death, but at least moving felt like defiance. Steiner thought of Greta, laughing at the family cat, fearless and joyful in Dresden. Thought of Anna waiting for letters that came intermittently or not at all. Thought of home as abstract concept, place that might not exist anymore or might never have existed outside imagination. The column walked into the white darkness. Temperature dropped toward -45. Soviet patrols moved somewhere in the night. Wolves howled in the distant forest, drawn by scent of death that followed the German retreat. They walked because walking was all that remained. The second night claimed 4 men before dawn. They simply stopped walking, sat in the snow, refused to rise despite shouts and physical shaking. Their eyes held the peculiar distance of those who'd finished calculating and reached conclusions. Steiner ordered them left. The column couldn't wait, couldn't spare carriers for men who'd chosen termination. He told himself they'd catch up later, knowing they wouldn't, knowing he'd added 4 more names to the list of failures that grew longer than any list of successes. By first light on January 17th, they'd covered another 6 kilometers. 36 remained. The mathematics ground forward with mechanical indifference. The terrain changed as they pushed west. Fewer villages, more open steppe. The land stretching flat and white to horizons that seemed to retreat as they advanced. Concealment became problem. Any Soviet patrol with binoculars could spot them from kilometers away. Dark figures crawling across white canvas like insects on paper. Reinhardt called halt in a depression that offered minimal cover, a geological wrinkle in the landscape, perhaps 3 meters deep, running north-south for half a kilometer. The men collapsed into it gratefully, burrowing into snow for insulation. Steiner did quick count, 69. 4 more had vanished during the night march, absorbed by darkness without announcement. Whether dead, captured, or simply wandered off in delirium, he'd never know. Hartmann moved among the wounded with dwindling supplies. Bandages had run out days ago. He used strips torn from the dead's uniforms. Morphine was memory. He dispensed what comfort remained: words, presence, lies about recovery. The medical bag now contained only basic instruments and the systematic documentation of failure. The doctor sat beside Steiner after completing rounds, face hollowed to skull beneath skin. "I've got 13 men who won't survive another night. Frostbite advancing to gangrene. Infection spreading. Organ failure beginning. They need hospital care, antibiotics, warmth, nutrition. They need things that don't exist out here. Can they walk? 6 can walk with support. 7 need to be carried. Then we carry them. Klaus, we're at the edge. The men carrying stretchers are barely stronger than those being carried. Another 12 hours and the equation inverts. More immobile than mobile. What are you suggesting?" Hartmann's silence was answer enough. Steiner shook his head before the thought completed. "No, we don't leave anyone. Professional triage says..." "I don't care what professional triage says. We've already lost too many. We keep the ones we still have, even if keeping them kills everyone, especially then. Because the moment we start making those calculations is the moment we become what sent us here." Hartmann didn't argue further, just nodded and returned to the wounded. Steiner watched him go and wondered if stubbornness was nobility or stupidity. The line between them had blurred somewhere back in the darkness. Private Miller died at 1100 hours. The man with 6 children, recipient of one of those 3 precious winter coats. The coat hadn't saved him. Frostbite had taken both feet, infection had spread, his kidneys had shut down. He died asking Steiner to tell his children their father had been brave. Steiner promised, knowing he'd never meet the children, knowing the promise was worthless currency, knowing he gave it anyway because worthless currency was all that remained. They couldn't bury him. The ground was iron, time was enemy, energy was spent. They laid him in the depression, covered him with snow, moved on. Behind them, the landscape slowly erased evidence of their passage. Within hours, Miller would be just another irregularity in white emptiness, indistinguishable from random drift. The march resumed at dusk. 68 men, 15 on stretchers, 23 walking with support, 30 capable of independent movement. Steiner revised his mathematics. With this distribution, They needed 4 men to carry shock support for every 3 hours of march. Rotation was essential, or the carriers would join the carried. But rotation meant constant stopping, organizing, redistributing weight. Their pace had dropped below half a kilometer per hour, 36 kilometers at half kilometer per hour, 72 hours of marching. They had perhaps 24 hours of collective will remaining. The river appeared without warning at 2300 hours. One moment they trudged through featureless white, next moment the ground dropped away to frozen waterway 30 meters across. Steiner called halt while scouts checked the ice. The scouts returned grim. Ice looks solid near edges. Center is questionable. We can see dark patches, probably thinner ice over current. The river doesn't fully freeze because it flows fast. Can we go around? Banks are steep both directions. Going around means adding 5, maybe 8 kilometers. We'd have to find a bridge or ford. We don't have 5 kilometers in us. We cross here. Herr Leutnant, the ice? We cross or we die here. Those are the options. Reinhardt had moved up during the exchange. Agreed. We cross. But we do it intelligently. Lightest men first. Space out the crossing, no more than 3 men on ice simultaneously. Stretchers get dismantled, wounded carried individually. The crossing began at midnight. Temperature had dropped to -47. Hartmann's thermometer recorded it before the mercury froze solid. The first men stepped onto ice tentatively, testing each footfall, spreading weight. The ice groaned beneath them, deep creaking that suggested structural stress. But it held. 12 men crossed safely, then 15, then 20. Hope began building. Maybe they'd make it. Maybe the ice would cooperate. Maybe luck would finally balance the scales. Private Thomas Koch stepped onto the ice at 01:37 hours, moving slowly, following the safe path previous men had marked. He was halfway across when the ice spoke. Sharp crack like rifle shot. Koch froze mid-step. The ice cracked again, spiderweb fractures radiating from his position. Get off! Move! Koch tried, took one step. The ice gave way. He dropped through with barely a sound, black water swallowing him instantly. 2 stretcher bearers standing nearby lunged to help. The ice beneath them fractured simultaneously. All 3 went under. Steiner and Reinhardt threw ropes toward the holes but saw nothing. The current ran fast beneath the ice, 3 meters per second, pulling bodies downstream under the frozen surface. By the time men reached the holes with poles, probing for survivors, the current had carried them too far. Temperature of water, -2 Celsius. Survival time, 90 seconds before incapacitation, 5 minutes before death. They searched for 10 minutes, breaking through ice downstream, finding nothing. The river had taken 3 men and wouldn't return them. 40 meters downstream, they spotted Koch's hand protruding through an ice window. Small patch of thinner ice where the frozen surface was translucent. His hand pressed against it from below, fingers splayed, frozen in that position. They tried to break through, but the ice was too thick, the current too strong. Koch stared up at them through the ice, eyes open, face blue, utterly dead. His expression held surprise, as if the manner of death had caught him unprepared. They left him there. No choice remained. The column resumed crossing at a different point, men spacing wider, testing each step with rifle butts. 4 more men fell through over the next hour. 2 were pulled out by ropes, both dead within minutes from cold shock. 2 disappeared entirely. When the last man reached the far bank at 04:30 hours, Steiner did count. 61. 7 lost to the river. Weber's calculation about dying together suddenly seemed prescient. They were doing exactly that, just slower than he'd predicted. Dawn revealed their position pitilessly. Open steppe, no cover, tracks in snow pointing directly to their location. If Soviet forces had any presence in the area, the column would be spotted within hours. Reinhardt made decision. Keep moving. Stopping in the open meant death by exposure or discovery. Movement at least created illusion of agency. They marched through January 18 under pale sun that provided light but no warmth. Men stopped trying to brush the snow from uniforms. The white camouflage was accidental advantage. They moved like ghosts across ghostland, silent except for labored breathing and occasional cry when someone collapsed. Hartman pronounced 3 men dead during daylight hours. All had been walking, just stopped mid-stride, stood swaying momentarily, fell forward. Hearts simply quit, too exhausted to continue. The other men walked around the bodies without comment, too tired to mark the deaths with ceremony. Steiner's mind had begun fragmenting, thoughts drifting away mid-formation. He'd start considering tactical problems and find himself thinking about Anna's voice instead, the way she'd laughed at his terrible jokes during their honeymoon. Then he'd snap back to the march, realize 10 minutes had passed, wonder how far they'd covered. Then drift again. At 1500 hours, they spotted structures on the horizon. Could be German positions, could be Soviet, could be hallucination. Several men had been seeing cities in the snow for days, walking toward phantom warmth. Reinhardt sent scouts ahead despite knowing he'd probably never see them again. Scouts rarely returned from these missions, consumed by the landscape or enemy action or their own exhaustion. But these scouts came back within an hour, faces animated for the first time in days. German positions. Forward picket for the new defensive line, 5 kilometers ahead. 5 kilometers might as well have been 50. The men had nothing left. But they'd also come 30 kilometers through impossibility and continued beyond the point where continuation made sense. 5 more kilometers was absurd, but no more absurd than any other aspect of their survival. The final approach took 7 hours. They arrived at German lines at 22 to 30 hours on January 18th. 61 men more dead than alive. The sentries barely recognized them as human, wrapped in Soviet coats, faces blackened by frostbite, moving with shambling gait of animated corpses. One sentry raised his rifle before realizing these were Germans, not Soviet infiltrators. Identify yourselves. Hauptmann Reinhardt, acting commander, remnants of 2nd and 4th Companies, 18th Panzer Infantry Division. Requesting permission to enter lines. Mein Gott. How many of you are there? 61. We started with 74 3 days ago, 147 6 weeks ago. The sentry's face showed comprehension of what those numbers meant. Come through. Medical is 200 meters east. Food after processing. The assembly point occupied a village called Gzhatsk, barely better than Mikhailovka, but marginally farther from Soviet pressure. Thousands of men crowded into inadequate space. Other units that had fought similar retreats, other survivors of impossible orders. The faces all held the same expression, hollow, haunted, surprised to be breathing. Hartman commandeered space in a barn for his wounded, began systematic assessment with resources that seemed miraculous after weeks of nothing. Actual bandages, some antibiotics, morphine in limited quantity. He worked through the night while Steiner and Reinhardt dealt with administrative processing. The processing officer was a major from division staff who'd never left headquarters, uniform immaculate, face well-fed, demeanor suggesting this was bureaucratic inconvenience rather than human catastrophe. Hauptmann Reinhardt. Unit strength, 61 effectives, 15 critically wounded, 26 walking wounded, 20 combat capable, from original strength of. The 18th Division entered Russia with 17,134 men in June. My companies totaled 147 on December 1st. We have 61 now. The major documented this without visible reaction. Equipment status, lost. All vehicles abandoned. Most crew-served weapons destroyed or left behind. Personnel weapons at maybe 30%. Rifles damaged by cold, ammunition exhausted. You'll be reconstituted with replacements after rest period. Respectfully, Major, these men aren't resting. They're dying slowly. They need hospital evacuation, extended recovery, psychological support. Noted. But the situation doesn't permit extended leave. You'll receive 72 hours rest, then reassignment. Reinhardt's control cracked microscopically. 72 hours. We've been in sustained combat for 6 weeks. Fought through hell getting here. Lost over half our strength. And we get 3 days. The Major's face hardened. Hauptmann, I understand you've had a difficult experience, but thousands of units are in similar circumstances. The war continues regardless of individual hardship. You'll take your 3 days and your replacements and return to duty. Dismissed. Outside, Reinhardt stood in the snow, shaking with rage or exhaustion or both. Steiner found him there 10 minutes later, still motionless. The Hauptmann's voice emerged quiet. Difficult experience. He called it a difficult experience. He's never been forward. Doesn't understand. He doesn't want to understand. Because understanding would mean acknowledging the system is broken. Easier to treat us as numbers that need refreshing than humans who've been destroyed. What do? We take the 3 days, rest the men, write the letters. Then we survive whatever comes next because that's all we've ever done. Hartmann's assessment came the following morning, documented in his careful medical hand. Of 61 men present, 15 required immediate evacuation, gangrene, organ failure, severe frostbite needing amputation. 3 died during the night despite treatment. 26 had moderate to severe frostbite, fingers, toes, ears, noses. Most would lose extremities. All needed extended medical care. 20 showed signs of combat exhaustion, severe enough to impair function. The 1,000-yard stare, inability to focus, flashbacks, violent trembling. Standard treatment was 6 months rest in rear area psychiatric facility. None would receive it. Total survivors who might return to combat effectiveness within reasonable time frame. 0. Steiner read the assessment and felt nothing. The capacity for emotion had frozen somewhere back along the march. He was hollow inside, awareness without feeling, observation without reaction. The mind protected itself by shutting down everything except basic function. He found himself in the barn that evening, watching Hartmann work. The doctor had just amputated Private Schaefer's left foot, the old man who'd received one of the coats. The foot had turned completely black, dead tissue breeding infection that would kill him if not removed. Hartmann cut carefully with actual surgical tools, ligated vessels properly, sutured the stump with precision his fieldwork had lacked. Schaefer woke from morphine haze and looked at the space where his foot had been. How am I supposed to work my farm with one foot? Hartmann cleaned his instruments without answering. My children depend on that farm. How do I plow? How do I harvest? I'm 47 years old. Who's going to hire a one-footed man? You're alive. That's more than most. Alive. Schaefer laughed bitterly. I'm a cripple. I'd have been better off freezing in that trench. Steiner moved away before the conversation concluded, unable to bear witnessing a man realize survival had been Pyrrhic victory. Better to have frozen than return home damaged beyond repair. The calculation many were making would continue making for decades. February brought gradual integration of replacements. Young soldiers arrived from Germany, fresh-faced, optimistic, believing propaganda about eventual victory. They looked at the survivors with mixture of awe and incomprehension. Couldn't process the walking scarecrows, the hollow eyes, the way veterans flinched at sudden sounds. One replacement, 18 years old, approached Steiner with eager questions. Herr Leutnant, is it true you fought near Moscow? Did you see the Kremlin? How close did we get? 30 kilometers. Then we can try again this summer. The Führer says, we'll never take Moscow, sir. You'll never take Moscow. You'll never take Russia. Winter won't allow it. But the Führer said we almost succeeded. Just needed better preparation. Steiner looked at the boy's unlined face, tried to remember when he'd possessed that certainty. The boy will learn. They all learn eventually. Give him 6 weeks. He walked away without further explanation, knowing words couldn't convey what experience taught. The boy would discover soon enough that maps in Berlin bore no relationship to reality in Russia. That summer campaigns bled into autumn, autumn into winter, winter into death. That the 1,000-year Reich was hemorrhaging to death in snow, and the bleeding wouldn't stop because pride wouldn't permit acknowledging the wound. Mail arrived in early February, first in months. Bundles of letters that had been chasing the division across Russia, always arriving where they'd been rather than where they were. Steiner received 3 envelopes, all from Anna. Posted in November and December, arriving now in February, messages from past arriving in present like ghosts. The November letter spoke of Greta's first steps, Anna's hope that Klaus would be home for Christmas, Normal domestic concerns from a life that seemed fictional now. The December letter reported the officers visiting, the missing in action notification, Anna's refusal to believe, her desperate plea for confirmation he still breathed. The third letter, dated January 8th, contained different tone entirely. Klaus, I received your letter from November. I know you're alive. I wept when I saw your handwriting. I showed Greta your photograph. She kissed it and said, Papa, but I must tell you something, and I hope you'll forgive me for the honesty. When I thought you were dead, I made peace with it. I imagined life without you, planned how to raise Greta alone, accepted that you'd become memory rather than presence. Now you're alive, and I'm grateful. But I'm also terrified, because every day I wait wondering if today brings the officers back to my door. I must live in hope and fear simultaneously. The woman who wrote you in November is gone. This winter killed her too. I'm what remains, harder, less certain, afraid to believe in permanence. I love you. I want you home. But I'm not sure either of us will recognize what comes home. War changes men. I've seen the veterans in town. They're different from those who left. Something essential is missing. I pray you haven't lost that essential thing, but I prepare myself for the possibility. Come home if you can, but come home honest. Don't pretend to be who you were. I'll love whoever you've become, but I need to know him truthfully. Steiner read it 3 times, each pass revealing new layers. Anna had seen through to the fundamental truth. They'd both been casualties, just in different ways. She'd lost the husband she'd married. He'd lost the man she'd married. What remained were damaged people trying to construct meaning from damage. He attempted response that night, words coming haltingly, how to explain what he'd seen, done, become. How to convey that the architect who'd left Dresden was dead, replaced by someone who understood killing intimately, who'd made impossible choices, who'd watched good men die for nothing. How to tell her that Greta would meet a stranger wearing her father's face. He wrote 3 lines, crossed them out, wrote 3 more, repeated until the paper was illegible. Finally abandoned the attempt. Some things couldn't be written. They'd have to be lived through, navigated in real time, if navigation was even possible. Reinhardt found him at midnight still sitting with blank paper. Writer's block, something like that. How do you explain to someone who wasn't there? You don't. You accept that the gap exists and try to build a bridge anyway. Have you built that bridge? Reinhardt shook his head. My wife stopped writing in October. Last letter said she couldn't bear the uncertainty anymore. Asked for divorce. I never responded because I was too busy not dying. I'm sorry, don't be. She was right to leave. The man she married died somewhere between the bug and here. I'm just the ghost wearing his name. They sat in shared silence. 2 ghosts discussing what it meant to haunt the world. Eventually, Reinhardt produced his journal, the letters to families of dead soldiers. The stack had grown to 200, neatly written, never sent. I'm going to give these to you. Sir, if I die, someone should have them. Maybe after the war, if there's an after, someone can deliver them, or at least file them somewhere. Document that these men existed and mattered. You're not going to die. We're all going to die, Klaus. Some of us just haven't done it yet. Reinhardt handed over the journal. These are my testimony, my evidence that individual lives counted for something. Keep them safe. Steiner accepted the weight, literal and figurative. I'll keep them, but you'll deliver them yourself when this ends, if it ends. The war or us, I can't tell which has more life left. The weeks bled into March. The survivors were scattered to different units as the division reconstituted itself. Steiner received orders assigning him to a fresh company, mostly replacements, a few veterans mixed in for seasoning. Reinhardt was sent to a different sector entirely. They shook hands at departure, wordless acknowledgement that they'd probably never meet again. Hartmann was medically discharged in mid-March. The frostbite that had taken 3 of his fingers had also damaged nerves in both hands. He couldn't perform surgery with the precision required. The Army had no use for a surgeon who couldn't operate. He returned to Berlin, opened a clinic treating veterans, charged no fees because he understood that men who'd given everything shouldn't have to pay for consequences. Of the 61 who'd reached the assembly point, 22 were still breathing by April 1st. 3 had died from complications despite medical care. 11 were permanently invalided out, amputations, blindness, psychiatric breaks too severe for military service. 25 remained in Army, scattered across the Eastern Front, most dead within 6 months. Spring arrived with cruel timing, revealing what winter had hidden. Steiner was near Smolensk when the thaw began. Temperatures climbing to 0, then 5 degrees, then 10. The snow receded like a slow-motion curtain draw, exposing the stage where winter's play had occurred. The bodies appeared first, hundreds, then thousands, emerging from white shrouds. Germans and Soviets intermingled, frozen in positions that told stories. 2 men locked in eternal combat, hands at each other's throats. A soldier sitting against a tree, rifle across lap, face peaceful. Entire squads that had stopped together and died together, arrayed in circle as if still conferring. The horses came next, standing upright, frozen solid for months, revealing themselves as snow melted from around their legs. Some still wore harnesses, still attached to supply wagons, faithful unto death and beyond. Their eyes stared at nothing, ice crystals permanent in corneas. Villages revealed themselves last, structures emerging like ancient ruins from archaeological dig. Walls marked by bullet holes and shrapnel scars. Burned timbers, empty windows staring at empty streets. Sometimes civilian bodies appeared in basements or collapsed buildings. Families who'd hidden, who'd tried to survive between armies, who'd failed. The smell became overwhelming as temperatures rose. Months of frozen dead now thawing, decomposition resuming. The entire landscape acquired sickly sweet rot odor, inescapable, permeating clothing and lungs. Men wore scarves soaked in vodka over their faces, but the stench penetrated regardless. Steiner witnessed a burial detail near a village that might have been Mikhailovka. The landmarks matched, but destruction made certainty impossible. The detail was loading bodies onto trucks for mass graves, working with mechanical efficiency born of repetition. German, Soviet, civilian, all went into the same trucks. Death had homogenized them beyond distinction. He walked through the village ruins, found the church where they'd held their final defense. The basement where Hartmann had operated was revealed now, filled with frozen medical waste, amputated limbs stacked like cordwood, blood-stained bandages, broken instruments, evidence of suffering preserved in ice, now melting into grotesque soup. Behind the church, he found a small mound that could have been Weber's grave. No marker remained. No way to confirm, just snow-covered earth that might contain his friend's body or might be random drift. He stood there for several minutes, trying to formulate words, failing, moving on. The dead were past speech. The living barely managed it. April brought statistics. Army Group Center published casualty figures for the winter offensive. 918,000 German casualties from October through March. Of these, 228,000 were frostbite cases. Estimated deaths directly attributable to cold, over 100,000. Horses lost, 350,000. The 18th Panzer Infantry Division's numbers were emblematic. Entered Russia with 17,134 soldiers. Effective strength April 1st, 4,200. Killed in action, 4,100. Died from cold, hunger, disease, 6,800. Missing, 2,034. The division had effectively ceased existing, replaced by a unit bearing the same number, but containing none of the original men. Steiner's company specifically, 147 on December 1st, 22 survived to February. Of those 22, only 8 still served by June. The rest were dead, invalided, or had simply vanished into the administrative chaos of a collapsing system. Survival rate, 5%. He did the mathematics obsessively, calculating which decisions had saved those 8, which had killed the 139, whether different choices would have altered outcomes. The conclusion was always the same. No decisions mattered. The system had fed them into machinery designed to destroy, and the machinery had functioned as intended. Individual agency was illusion. They were meat in grinder, and the grinder cared nothing for tactics or bravery or desperate humanity. May brought reassignment. Steiner was promoted to Hauptmann, not for competence but because so many officers were dead that promotions came automatically to survivors. He received a new company, mostly 17 and 18-year-olds, boys pretending to be soldiers. They looked at him with expectant faces, waiting for speeches about glory and victory. He gave them honesty instead. You're going to die. Not might, will. Most of you within 6 months, some faster. A few might last longer through luck or cowardice. The war is lost. We just haven't admitted it yet. Your job is to survive as long as possible and kill as many of them as necessary to keep surviving. Don't be brave. Don't be heroic. Just be alive tomorrow. That's the only victory available. The boys' faces showed shock at his bluntness. One raised his hand. Herr Hauptmann, the Führer says final victory is certain. The Führer has never spent winter in Russia. Dismissed, they learned. By July, the survivors had acquired the same hollow eyes, the same mechanical movements, the same understanding that patriotic speeches bore no relationship to reality. They'd become what Steiner's generation had become, damaged machines that still functioned, but forgot why they were functioning. In August, Steiner was badly wounded near Rurov. Soviet artillery scored direct hit on his observation post. Shrapnel shredded his left leg below the knee, peppered his torso, left him bleeding out in a crater. Medics found him before he exsanguinated, tourniqueted the leg, evacuated him to field hospital. The surgeon, not Hartmann, just another doctor doing impossible work, delivered the assessment with clinical detachment. The leg is destroyed, bones shattered, major vessels severed, muscle tissue macerated. Amputation below knee is necessary. Do I have your consent? Take it. I'm tired of walking anyway. The surgery occurred under proper anesthetic. Morphine existed in rear areas, luxury the front never enjoyed. He woke to absence, the missing weight, the phantom sensations of limb that no longer existed. The stump was bandaged carefully, drain tubes protruding, throbbing with pain that suggested nerve endings were confused about what remained and what didn't. The doctor visited during recovery. You'll be invalided out. Medical discharge within 6 weeks. Home by October. Home. The word sounded foreign. After 16 months in hell, the concept of not hell seemed impossible to process. You're certain. Your fighting days are over, Hauptmann. You gave enough. Time to let others carry the weight. Steiner laughed, sound bitter and raw. Others? You mean the 17-year-olds? The children we're feeding into the machine because we've run out of adults. I don't make policy. I just repair what arrives broken. Then you'll be busy for decades. We're all broken. Some just hide it better. The hospital train west departed in September, carrying hundreds of wounded toward Germany and the fiction of recovery. Steiner watched Russian landscapes slide past, snow already dusting the fields, even though winter hadn't officially arrived. The country was preparing for another season of killing, the cycle perpetual, the war grinding forward regardless of human cost. He arrived in Dresden on December 3, 1943, exactly 2 years after the attack on Lobnya, where Fritz had died, where everything had started unraveling. The train pulled into a station that seemed absurdly normal. Civilians moving about their business, children laughing, women shopping. The disconnect between this normalcy and the Eastern hellscape was so profound that Steiner questioned which reality was real. Anna waited on the platform, Greta holding her hand. He saw them through the window and something broke inside his chest. Anna looked older, lines around her eyes that hadn't existed, gray threading through her blonde hair, posture suggesting someone who'd carried heavy loads. Greta had grown impossibly tall, a small person now rather than a toddler. He descended from the train using crutches, left pant leg pinned up below the knee, medals he'd never earned displayed on his chest because regulations required it. Anna spotted him, face cycling through shock and recognition and grief and relief in rapid sequence. She rushed forward, stopped a meter away as if uncertain whether she could touch him. Klaus. The word emerged as question and statement simultaneously. Anna, I'm home. Whatever that means. She closed the distance, embraced him carefully, avoiding injury sites. He felt her shaking, or maybe he was shaking. Impossible to tell. They held each other while the world moved around them. Two damaged people trying to remember how to occupy the same space. Then a small hand tugged his coat. He looked down into eyes that mirrored his own, dark brown, serious, studying him with preternatural focus. Greta spoke in voice barely above whisper, 3 years of vocabulary at her command. Mama said you were cold. Are you warm now? The question pierced through armor he'd built over 16 months, reached something essential he'd thought was dead. Tears began flowing without permission, silent crying that had no sound but wouldn't stop. He knelt on one leg, came down to her level, looked into his daughter's face. Yes, Schatz. I'm warm now. Good. She stepped forward and hugged him, small arms wrapping around his neck. Mama cried when you were cold. I don't want her to cry anymore. Neither do I. They stayed there, father and daughter meeting for the first time, Anna standing over them crying openly now, other passengers moving past with respectful distance. Nobody spoke. The moment required silence, demanded space for reunion too complex for words. That evening, after Greta was asleep, Anna and Steiner sat at the kitchen table drinking real coffee, rationed and precious, but real. She studied him carefully, cataloging changes. You're different. We both are. You said that in your letter. The woman you were is gone. Anna nodded. I've changed, but I'm still me underneath. You're, she gestured vaguely, somewhere else. I can see it. You're sitting here, but you're not here. I'm in a trench outside Moscow. I'm carrying Weber through snow. I'm watching men freeze to death. I'm making choices that killed people who trusted me. Tell me. Tell me everything. I can't. You weren't there. Words won't carry it. Try anyway. I need to understand who came home. So he tried. Told her about Fritz freezing at his radio, about the weapons failing, about hand-to-hand combat in darkness, about hunger reducing them to animals, about Weber dying while quoting Virgil, about the march through hell, about the river swallowing men, about spring revealing the horror winter had hidden. He spoke for 2 hours, words tumbling out in disconnected fragments, chronology meaningless, just images and sounds and smells that had burned themselves into memory. Anna listened without interruption. When he finished, she was crying again, but quietly, the way someone cries who's absorbed another's pain into their own structure. We should hate them for this, for what they did to you. Who should we hate? The Russians defending their country, the generals following orders, the system that created the orders, Hitler, ourselves for participating. There's enough blame to distribute infinitely without ever finding the person responsible. What do we do now? We survive. Raise Greta. Try to be decent despite indecency. Wait for the war to end and hope there's something left to rebuild. Do you think there will be? Steiner looked out the window at Dresden's nighttime streets. Lights dimmed for air raid precautions, civilians hurrying home before curfew. I think we're all ruins now. Some of us just haven't collapsed yet. But maybe ruins can be foundations. Maybe what comes after is built on what we destroyed. That's almost hopeful. It's the best I can manage. Then it's enough. Over the following months, Steiner attempted reintegration into civilian life as much as wartime allowed. His prosthetic leg arrived in February, crude wooden affair that attached below knee, causing chafing and pain but permitting mobility. He learned to walk again, relearned balance, adapted. Greta accepted his presence with child's flexibility, asking questions that adults would avoid. Why is your leg wood now? Because the real one was hurt. Does it hurt? Sometimes. Can I draw on it? Yes. She decorated the prosthetic with colored pencils, covering it with flowers and animals and abstract designs that made nurses at the clinic laugh. He tried returning to architecture but found his hands wouldn't hold pencils steadily. Nerve damage from frostbite, tremors from trauma, coordination corrupted. The precision required for drafting was beyond him. He abandoned the attempt after 3 weeks. Instead, he took a position at the Veterans Office, helping returning soldiers navigate bureaucracy. The work suited him. He understood what they'd endured, spoke their language, could cut through official obfuscation to secure benefits they'd earned. Mostly he listened, let them tell stories nobody else wanted to hear, bore witness to horror so they weren't alone in remembering. One veteran returned from Stalingrad with no legs and ruined lungs, spoke about the pocket during their first meeting. We ate horses, then we ate rats, then we ate the horses that had eaten rats. Some units ate their dead. I didn't, but I understood why they did. Steiner understood too. Explained the same descent he'd witnessed, the progression from human to survival mechanism, the calculations that seemed monstrous to those who hadn't faced them. The veteran wept with relief that someone comprehended without judging. By late 1944, the war had turned decisively. Soviet forces drove westward, reversing the conquests of 1941, approaching German borders. Steiner followed their progress on maps with mixture of dread and satisfaction. Dread because he knew what Soviet revenge would look like. They'd learned from Germans how to prosecute total war. Satisfaction because the system that had sent him into hell was finally receiving justice. January 1945 brought rumors of Soviet forces entering Germany itself. The refugees arrived first, columns of civilians fleeing the advance, carrying what they could, abandoning everything else. They brought stories of atrocities that mirrored what German troops had inflicted going east. The wheel was turning. History was extracting payment. Anna watched the refugees and turned to Steiner with quiet desperation. We should leave, before they arrive. Take Greta west, beyond the Elbe. Surrender to the Americans instead. We can't. I'm too damaged to move fast. You'd be alone with a 4-year-old in winter. Better to stay. Face what comes. They'll kill us. You know what we did there. They'll want revenge. Then we die. But we die honestly. No more running. Klaus, think about Greta. We have to protect her. The best protection I can give her is teaching her truth, that actions have consequences, that we destroyed their country and now face the bill, that sometimes the only dignity available is accepting judgment without flinching. That's not protection, that's surrender. It's reality. The war is over. We lost. Now comes the reckoning. Dresden burned in February. The bombing raids came at night. Wave after wave of British and American aircraft dropping incendiaries that created firestorm visible from kilometers away. The old city, Baroque architecture Steiner had studied as student, buildings he'd planned to restore someday, vanished in flames. 25,000 dead, some estimates said more. Steiner stood on a hill outside the city, watching it burn, Greta holding one hand and Anna the other. The child asked, "Why are they burning our city?" Because we burned theirs first. Because war is circular. Because we convinced ourselves we were special, exempt from consequences. Now we're learning we're not. I don't understand. Someday you will. Remember this. Remember that pride leads to fire. That nations that believe themselves superior end up ashes. That the only thing protecting us from barbarism is remembering we're capable of it. The Soviet forces entered Dresden in May. The Wehrmacht had mostly dissolved, isolated units still fighting, but systematic defense had collapsed. Steiner and his family waited in their apartment, door unlocked, valuables hidden but not too carefully. They'd made peace with whatever happened next. The Soviet soldier who arrived was young, maybe 20, face scarred from combat, eyes hard. He entered with rifle raised, surveyed the room, saw Steiner's uniform hanging in the corner. Left on display deliberately, evidence of participation rather than cowardice of concealment. You are Wehrmacht, yes. Hauptmann, invalid, wounded near Rzhev. The soldier studied him, particularly the pinned pant leg. You fought in Russia, December 1941 through August 1943. Then you saw it, what we saw. Yes, I saw what we did. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I'm sorry anyway. Sorry changes nothing. The Soviets' voice carried exhaustion rather than anger. My village was destroyed. Everyone dead. I found them when we recaptured the area. My mother was... He stopped, unable to continue. Just know I saw what you did. I know. I was there. I participated. I'm guilty. The soldier raised his rifle, finger on trigger. I should kill you. You deserve it. I don't disagree. But my daughter is 4. She's done nothing. Whatever you do to me, let them leave first. The soldier looked at Greta, who'd hidden behind Anna but now peeked out, fearless despite circumstances. The moment stretched impossibly long. Then he lowered the rifle. Your daughter looks like my sister did. Before. He turned toward the door, paused. You will live, but you will remember. Every day you remember what you did. That's your punishment. I've never stopped remembering. That's my punishment already. Then carry it forever. He left, footsteps echoing down the stairwell, leaving them untouched but marked nonetheless. The occupation proceeded with surprising order. Looting occurred but less than expected. Some revenge killings, some abuses, but systematic genocide that German propaganda had predicted never materialized. The Soviets had learned from German example and chosen, barely imperfectly, not to replicate it entirely. Steiner worked with occupation authorities when they discovered his language skills and military experience. He helped translate, facilitated coordination between German civilian authorities and Soviet military government, made himself useful because useful people survived and useless people disappeared. In quiet moments he wrote, not reports or analyses, but testimonies. The experience of that winter, the decisions made, the men lost, the lessons learned. He pulled out Reinhardt's journal, the letters to families, and added his own observations, creating document that bore witness to horror and humanity intermingled. One letter in Reinhardt's hand had been addressed to Weber's family in Munich. Steiner read it carefully. Your son Hans Weber died January 16, 1942, from combat wounds sustained defending his comrades. He was brave beyond measure, scholarly to the end, respected by all who served with him. He spoke often of his students, his love of classical literature, his hope to return and resume teaching. He quoted Virgil in his final moments. Perhaps one day it will be pleasing to remember even these things. He believed better days would come. Please know he died among friends who honored him. Steiner added his own postscript. Hans Weber was my friend. I failed to save him. I carry that failure like I carry the faces of all the men who trusted me and died despite that trust. Your son was better than the war that killed him, better than the country that sent him east, better than the rest of us who survived when better men didn't. If Greta asks about heroes, I'll tell her about Hans Weber, who killed when necessary, but never stopped being human. That's the only heroism that mattered. Years passed. The occupation softened into something approximating normal governance. Germany divided into zones. Dresden fell under Soviet control. Life settled into rhythm dictated by occupiers, but recognizably civilian. Steiner continued his work with veterans, watched Greta grow, tried to be decent father despite damage. He never wrote to Anna about what happened in Russia. Couldn't find words adequate. But sometimes at night she'd hear him crying, or screaming in his sleep, or whispering names of dead men. She'd hold him without speaking, offering presence rather than understanding, because understanding was impossible for those who hadn't been there. Greta grew into a young woman who asked pointed questions. At 16, she demanded full accounting. What had he done? What had he witnessed? What was his responsibility? He told her everything, sparing nothing, showing her the darkness he'd participated in. When he finished, she was crying. How do you live with that? By never forgetting it. By trying to be better than I was. By raising you to be better than my generation. By working with the broken men who returned and helping them find ways to live with their own darkness. By refusing to pretend it was glorious or necessary, or anything except horror that we inflicted and survived. Do you regret serving? I regret everything except the men I served with. Weber, Hartmann, Reinhardt. They were good people in impossible circumstances. The war was evil. They weren't. That distinction matters. Does it change what happened? No, but it changes what I teach you. That individual decency matters even when systems are indecent. That we stayed together rather than abandoning each other. That small acts of humanity in hell are worth more than grand gestures in peace. That's what I want you to remember. In 1975, 33 years after that winter, Steiner received a letter from Munich. The return address was familiar, the veterans' office where Weber had worked before the war. Inside was a brief note and a photograph. The note, Herr Hauptmann Steiner, I am the daughter of Hans Weber. I found your postscript in my father's effects after my mother died. I never knew him. He died before I was born, but your words helped me understand what kind of man he was. Thank you for remembering him. Enclosed is the only photograph I have. I thought you might want a copy. The photograph showed Weber in Munich, summer of 1938, standing outside a school building. He wore civilian clothes, held books under one arm, smiled at the camera with unguarded joy. The man in the photograph bore no resemblance to the skeletal sergeant Steiner remembered from frozen trenches. This was Weber before the war destroyed him, when future still seemed bright and teaching Latin to teenagers was life's highest purpose. Steiner sat with the photograph for an hour, unable to move, tears flowing freely. Anna found him there and understood without asking. He showed her the image. This is who he was. Before Russia, before everything, who you all were. Yes, we were people with futures. Then we became survivors with pasts. The photograph is evidence that the before existed, that we weren't always what war made us. You honor them by remembering. I honor them by refusing to let their deaths mean nothing. By teaching Greta and anyone else who'll listen that war doesn't create heroes. It creates corpses and damaged men and memories that never heal. The only heroism is surviving without becoming monsters. Most of us failed that test, but some tried. That's worth remembering. Klaus Steiner died in 1986, 69 years old. Liver failure from decades of alcohol use. The medication veterans self-prescribed for nightmares that never stopped. His last words spoken to Anna with Greta present were quiet. I'm cold. Tell them I was cold. But I stayed warm enough to get home. Greta inherited his writings, the journal he'd kept, Reinhardt's letters, the testimony he'd compiled. She published them in 1990 after the wall fell, when Germany was reuniting and history could be examined without political filters. The book sold modestly, was used in some university courses, mostly disappeared into academic obscurity. But occasionally Greta received letters from readers, veterans who recognized themselves in Steiner's words. Children of veterans who finally understood their father's silence. Historians who appreciated primary source honesty. Each letter confirmed that testimony mattered, that bearing witness served purpose, that the dead demanded remembrance even when remembering hurt. The final lesson of that terrible winter wasn't about tactics or strategy or national power. It was simpler, more fundamental. Empires built on hubris fall in snow. But humanity, fragile, imperfect, sometimes decent despite itself, survives even frozen hell. Not unchanged, never whole again, but alive. Bearing witness, refusing to let the horror vanish unacknowledged. That's what Steiner left Greta. Not pride or glory or justified sacrifice. Just truth, that her father tried, in his limited way, to be decent when the world was indecent. That he failed often but kept trying. That he carried the weight of impossible choices until it killed him. That he loved her despite being broken. That sometimes love and damage coexist without contradiction. And perhaps that's sufficient legacy to be remembered honestly rather than heroically, to have tried rather than succeeded, to have stayed human when humanity was optional. The winter of 1941 took 100,000 German lives directly, took millions more over the following years, took everyone who survived it in ways that didn't show on casualty lists, took innocence and certainty and faith in progress, left only knowledge that nature is the ultimate power, that hubris invites destruction, that winter never loses. Klaus Steiner learned that lesson in frozen trenches outside Moscow, carried it home, taught it to his daughter, died knowing it was the only wisdom worth transmitting, that we're all fragile, all mortal, all subject to forces beyond control. The only choice is whether we face that reality with honesty or denial. He chose honesty. It didn't save him, but it let him live with having survived when better men didn't. That's not victory, but in war, it's as close as anyone gets.